This is the High School Football Preview Show with Mike Wenmacher, Tim Schweitzer, Steve Bridge, and Derek Paris on 97.7 and 970 WMAY, Springfield's News and Talk.
Welcome in to Week 7 of the High School Football Preview Show. I am Mike Wenmacher, joined as always by an esteemed panel. Derek Paris from Channel 1450, Steve Bridge from the Rochester Rocket broadcast, and Tim Schweitzer from the SHG Cyclone broadcast. And gentlemen, it's hard to believe we're in the home stretch, final third of the regular season here, and we have a couple of really big matchups to get to. But before we get there, let's talk about the Week 6 results. We'll start with you, Steve. Rochester defeated Decatur Eisenhower 63-24. The 24 points for Eisenhower, I think, got a lot of people looking. I imagine that, though, may have been a byproduct of some young guys getting some varsity time towards the end there.
It really was. I'd say that the Rochester varsity team handled the Eisenhower varsity team very, very well. That's not to say that Eisenhower doesn't have a couple of pretty intriguing weapons there on offense. I thought that, that's a team that's just lacking kind of in overall numbers, but otherwise has a couple of really terrific athletes that they can put on the field and deploy. And also, when you're sitting there and you start to count the number of kids in Eisenhower colors, well, they just don't have really the depth at the varsity or JV level to sub in much once the running clock got going. So the Panthers kept their starters on the field because that was almost the bulk of their roster, with a couple of exceptions here and there. And they just continued to play and ran their varsity players out against JV players and eventually against some freshmen that Rochester had on the field. But that's all right? The running clock doesn't mean that you have to give up if you're the Eisenhower Panthers, and they didn't, and they were able to put up a couple of touchdowns on the Rockets as that game went on throughout the end of the first half and on into the third and fourth quarters, and it turned out to be a pretty good game, and hopefully one that the Panthers can feel a little bit good about. Leaving out of that one, they performed very well at times, and Gary Henderson, their quarterback, is a lot to handle. That young man could lead the Panthers maybe to some more points, and hopefully an improbable victory for them as the season winds down.
Whereas Eisenhower put up 24 in Rochester, Tim, you had a game where SHG really took care of business against Southeast, a 63-0 victory for them. What did you see in that ball game that really stood out to you, Tim?
Big plays for Sacred Heart Griffin were the key for the SHG offense. They scored on 8 of their 9 possessions, and the 9th touchdown came on a fumble recovery in the end zone. So the Cyclones took care of business. They cleaned it up from a sloppy game versus Lancaster the week before, played a really good, solid effort against Southeast, and got their playoff eligibility 5th win, which is always the goal for everybody this time of the year.
Yeah, and for the Glenwood Titans, they got the 6th win to guarantee a playoff berth for them. Obviously, all these teams we talk about have much loftier goals than just getting in, but a 42-0 victory over Normal U High. And Coach Hay had mentioned it last week about they had actually circled Decatur MacArthur and U High, those games before the season even started, because of the trip up they had a bit last year after a victory over Rochester. So they were businesslike, they were focused, and that's kind of what Coach said. It was funny, Coach speak, he said, the week of practice, the focus was the focus, and they were focusing on those 2 games. So the Titans were able to take care of business 42-0 against Normal U High and punch their ticket to the postseason. Before we get into the big games this week, Derek, I want to start with you. 2/3 of the season already over, or the regular season. What has kind of stuck out to you the most when it comes to these teams that we talk about on a week in and week out basis?
Well, that's a pretty broad question, but I think we kind of had the big game circled in week 4 for once we kind of knew what the teams were after week 1, where it was like, okay, Glenwood Rochester is the big game. And then after that one, it's kind of been everybody looking at the calendar like, okay, let's get to the end of the regular season and get to these crossover games because, obviously this week we have some really good matchups in terms of records, whether it be MacArthur Rochester or SHG Springfield. But I think we really have been looking forward to seeing how these teams stack up against each other and then how these rivalry games are going to go based on not only what we've seen this year, but I mean, look at last year where the Glenwood SHG game goes to overtime, comes down to a 50-yard field goal. I mean, just so many different things in that game that were incredible that we're like, okay, where's that game next year? And when can we get to it? And so obviously Rochester SHG is always one of those games. So I think it's kind of been, just kind of the shakeout of, we kind of expected Glenwood to win the conference and Rochester to be right there. And we got to see such a great game in week 4. And now it's like, okay, will SHG win that side of the conference? And then let's see how they stack up against Glenwood and Rochester. And so we're kind of here now. And I think all the teams are just excited to see, how they stack up and then, where they go in the playoffs, because there's been some interesting conversations about, where a lot of these teams are going to go in the postseason as well. And I think that that's something, once you get in, you're like, okay, what's the path going to be, especially for, the Glenwood, the SHG, and the Rochesters. It's like, who are we going to see along the way, and what's our path look like to get there? And so a lot of kind of anticipation and waiting, and, we've kind of drudged through some not so great games. And so it's now time to get to those good games.
Yes, it is. And before we get to those real quick, Steve, through 2/3 of the season for the Rockets, what has stood out for you the most thus far this season?
The continued excellence of that defense and just how troublemaking they can be up front across the board. The front seven has just really continued to kind of exert their will on things that are going on offensively on the other side of the ball, those other teams that meet. And then still, I'm curious and can't wait to watch still how the offensive nature of this team just kind of continues to come together. Last week, it was Tanner Beal's opportunity to essentially play the entire half of meaningful football against Eisenhower. And we had heard that head coach Derek Leonard was going to kind of maybe take each quarterback, JP Leonard and also Tanner Beal, give them an opportunity to kind of have an entire game to themselves. And then, this is the home stretch, big games like Derek was talking about, right? And you're talking about here, Mike, coming up that, include Springfield High and SHG, and then the playoffs, and what will and how will this offense mature to really be what we would expect to see, kind of at peak level for the Rockets. I still don't think they know, and I sure do believe that I don't know exactly what that story is. So I can't wait to see how that continues to play out.
Tim, for you, same question. 2/3 of the season through for the Cyclones. What has stood out to you most about this team thus far?
Well, after they were whacked by St. Louis CBC opening night, they have gotten better each week. And that was the coaching staff's goal, to see this team get better each week. And here we are into week 7, and they're a better team than they were opening night, and they need to get better because this rugged final 3 of the regular season is going to test them for sure.
Yes, and quickly before we get to that, as far as Glenwood, I think it's just the business-like approach. When you have as many upperclassmen, as many seniors as they have, Coach mentioned it today when I talked to him about the senior thing is kicking in. They're understanding even more that, each and every game is something to be cherished because it doesn't last forever. And just their business-like approach to where they're handling their business has really stood out to me thus far for the Glenwood Titans. So let's get to the matchups for this week. We'll start with Rochester, Caden MacArthur. Derek, I'll go to you first. What are you seeing from that matchup?
A lot of great athletes on both sides of the ball. It's going to be we might, Steve and Chris might be in for a shootout, kind of like we saw with Mount Zion, where MacArthur's able to move the ball. They're able to score. We've seen that, in most of their games outside of the Glenwood game. And so they always get really up for this game, obviously, because Rochester is who Rochester is. And I think that, MacArthur, quietly, we don't know the stats, but they're putting up some really good numbers, and they really want to come in and kind of make a statement in this game after not being able to do that against Chatham. And so I think that this is a good opportunity for them. And then, Rochester celebrating homecoming and, getting a chance to come back home after, being on the road for a couple weeks. I think they'll be focused on kind of making sure that they, finish second place in the division and kind of get ready for these last 2 weeks, because they want to make sure that, you don't want to lose to a Glenwood and then a MacArthur at home. I mean, how often does that happen where you lose back-to-back games, especially in conference? So I look for the Rochester Rockets to be focused on that and making sure they handle business and not really look ahead to SHG or to Springfield High.
Steve, what are you hearing? You're around the coaching staff. What's kind of the message been to the players this week as they take on Decatur MacArthur?
I think kind of what Derek said, you got homecoming. You're back after a couple weeks. The last time you're at home, you lost a heartbreaker to Chatham Glenwood, and so you can't let it slip twice at home. And Decatur MacArthur and the Rockets have had an interesting history. Those games have always been probably a little bit closer than maybe a lot of times what the records would have suggested that they should be between those two schools. And so you've got a 5-1 MacArthur team showing up, one that though was handled pretty easily by the Titans there, Mike, and now we're going to find out really what MacArthur is. I mean, are they a 5-1 team that can hang with everybody except for the top quarter of the conference here, or can they kind of exert some of what they want to do against even the teams that we perceive as the best ones and the top ones here in the CS8? If you're Rochester, though, you're going to have to slow down that running attack here that the MacArthur Generals have really done a great job on over the last couple of weeks, just executing play after play after play. They're starting to throw the ball a little bit more than they were early on in the season, so you'll have to play a little bit of defense there in the secondary, but man, MacArthur can run the ball really, really well. So it's going to be up to a pretty stout Rocket defense to be able to slow them down and slam the door a little bit here and see how it's going to turn out for the Rockets at their homecoming.
Before we get to the Marquee City matchup in the city of Springfield, just quickly on Glenwood and Lincoln, the biggest thing that I took away from talking with Coach Hay earlier today was the fact that Glenwood hasn't been to Lincoln for a football game in 10 years. That was kind of shocking to me, but you remember they left for the Apollo Conference, and the past couple of times Glenwood's actually hosted them. And I asked Coach too, this is not a long road trip, but a bit lengthier than, going over to Memorial Stadium for the Titans. And I asked him if, they're eventually going to have to go on the road, pretty long trip, a 2-hour trip if they want to get where they want to go. And if it was nice to at least have this kind of reset the mechanism, as it were, to kind of be on the bus a little bit longer and to remember what it's like, what the process is like to get yourself ready to play a football game. And he said that's probably what they're looking forward to the most, is just getting back into that groove of getting on a bus, getting on the road, getting off, and getting ready to play on time. So that's something we'll be looking for with that game Friday night between the Titans and the Rail Splitters. So let's get to it, Tim. You got Springfield High and SHG, a battle of probably, I would imagine, where SHG, when they look at Brody Scheffler, that's what they want Cam Brickman to get to, I would imagine, the quarterback for Springfield.
Well, Brody's been very good, and Cam's very good, and Cam's a junior, and Brody's a senior, and if Brody has one advantage, it's just that he's played another season, or half season, more so than Cam. But, Mike, the key to this game is for both teams. They're 5-1. They're both going to be in the playoffs. You cannot understate how huge this game is. The winner has a chance to play a lesser opponent in the playoffs, to get a better seed in the playoffs. The loser is probably or possibly going to be going on the road to play a 9-0 in the first round of the playoffs. So you cannot understate how big this game is for postseason seeding purposes and potentially West Division Conference Championship in the CS8 as well. But if you're thinking playoffs and where you're going to be, you've got to win this game. And the Senators are banged up a little bit. They've played great football recently. They've got some key guys out or not at 100%. SHG's been dealing with injuries all season. They're getting a little healthier. They have a couple of people who are still on the shelf or out for the season that would help them. You'd like to see both teams at 100%, but I think it's going to be a heck of a game. And for Springfield High fans, just a reminder, Senators haven't beaten the Cyclones in 6 years, so here's your chance with your senior quarterback and a good team right down the street at Cyclone Stadium on Friday night.
Derek, what do you see? What are you looking forward to most in this matchup between the Cyclones and the Senators?
I think maybe just the emotions of it, because even in Pigskin previews and talking to these two teams about the seasons ahead, I think both of them kind of mentioned this game already back almost 2 months ago, where this means a lot. It's the city matchup, but that rivalry has really become something over the last decade. When you talk about the Rashad Rochelle's and Taryn Wallace's and them just finally getting over that hump and beating them, and now it's like, okay, Springfield believes that they can do it, and to a lot of those kids, that's half the battle. And so for SHG to have the chance to welcome them to Ken Leonard Field this year and really prove where they are and win the conference. I mean, I think that that's big for them as well. And so I think really just kind of emotions and making sure you stay disciplined in this one, because that could be the difference, in terms of, field position or, one or two possessions. And so I really look for, both teams to make sure that they kind of take care of the ball and take care of their emotions.
What do you see as, Derek, that could be that one X factor in this game? Because always in these games, we have two really evenly matched teams. There's that one player, that one guy who can make a difference. Who are you looking at, or what are you looking at as an X factor in this game?
Well, I think for that one, it could be special teams, because if you look at, how Springfield has won some of those games, especially Q&D on the road, it was, a couple punt blocks or, just their kickers or something like that, where, you saw it last year with SHG, a 50-yard field goal forced the overtime with Glenwood. So, I mean, I think we kind of know what we're going to get with both offenses at this point in the season. So, defenses have to step up and make sure that they do their thing. But I think you really have to key in on special teams if you're looking for that X factor to say, hey, that could steal us possession, 3 points here or there. And, that could be the difference in a game like this.
Tim, would you agree that the defense that makes the big stop maybe end up being the winning team in this football game?
No doubt. I'm looking at special teams, as Derek mentioned, but also turnovers. Who forces them? Who gets them? And both teams have relied on their defense to force them. So we'll see what happens. Springfield High special teams, since that MacArthur loss, has gotten a lot better. And if Springfield High doesn't screw up on a late extra point try against MacArthur, they're 6-0 coming into this game. So special teams and turnovers may be the key.
Yes, Coach Hay always likes to say for Glenwood, you don't talk about special teams till you talk about special teams, and usually it's not for the best reasons, to be sure. Quickly to you, Steve, but before we wrap up here, what's the biggest thing you're looking for in the MacArthur-Rochester game? What's kind of the X factor you see in that football game?
Slow down the run, and like Tim said, turnovers. The Rockets have gotten into the habit the last couple of weeks against U High and Eisenhower and punching out a couple of balls. They've forced some turnovers. They've got a couple of interceptions. They've had a pick six already this year too. That's been pretty key in a game. And so just how much can the Rochester defense kind of do a little bit of the work and create that better field position here for an offense that is still out there every once in a while looking for its own identity. So what will the Rockets do on defense, and can they force some turnovers against that MacArthur run game primarily? Will that be a key?
We have a big week for you here in the Woodward kind of bunch of stations that we have. So, gentlemen, appreciate your time as always for the high school football preview show. Quickly, Tim, where can people find the Cyclone broadcasts?
Sports Radio 1450 AM, 92.3 FM, the sportsradio1450.com website, and the mobile app.
Steve, where can people listen to the Rochester Rockets game?
Find us on 97.7 FM. Chris McLeod and I will be there on Friday night. Also the WMAY app.
And for the Glenwood Titans, it's 9:70 a.m. Going back to where we originated the Glenwood broadcast all those years ago. You can hear Ryan Fantozzi and Coach Dan Rourke. And, of course, you can get it through the app and at WMAY.com. And, Derek, I have a feeling I know what the game of the week is for Channel 1450.
Well, we got a lot of them, honestly. There's quite a few. SHG Springfield, but Williamsville, New Berlin is a big one. Moreau Olympia, Rochester MacArthur. And then, even Saturday night we'll be at undefeated 8-man where it's Pawnee and South Fork. So there's a ton of big games this week for us.
So what Derek's saying, he needs to clone himself is what it's boiling down to to cover everything this particular weekend. Gentlemen, thank you for the time. Have a great broadcast on Friday night, and we'll reconvene next week for another edition of the High School Football Preview Show.
Catch the High School Football Preview Show live every Friday night at 6 on 97.7 and 970 WMAY. Listen to the podcast and watch the replay online at WMAY.com.